Okay, thanks everyone for coming to the Bountiful Branches mini class. We have Dillon Weist here. He's the manager of the Bounty Garden, which is part of NWTC's Sustainable Food and Agriculture Systems program. And he's going to lead us in a presentation of the what, why, and how of food forests. Thank you, Dillon.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Hi there, folks, both in person and that we're looking at the. Here we go, online. Nice to see you. I will be discussing, like she said, the what, why, and how of food forests. And just to make sure I plug it in the beginning and end, this is in part with Newly Foods Bountiful Branches program, which is having a plant sale of a variety of native and adopted edible perennials. That'll be happening May 11th, 2024 from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. in the back of the Green Bay Botanical Garden. It's where the Sustainable Ag Program's garage is, and I will be facilitating that sale. So that's part of what's making this happen. So if you haven't already purchased from the sale, please be inclined to do so. And the Sustainable Ag Club at my school will be hosting a little plant sale as well. So we'll have some flowers and organic vegetable crops for sale as well. So yeah, that's just make sure to get that out before I forget. So then a little of my background first, the who. My name is Dillon Weist. I have a degree of sustainable agriculture and food systems. I'm also a certified permaculture designer, and I'll get into what that means a bit later. I'm a teaching aide and the manager of NWTC's Bounty Garden, and I'm also the facilitator of the Brown County Food Forest Coalition, which I can speak to at some other point. That's a picture of me actually in the Shire in New Zealand, the little stage set that they had in the spring of 2020, which was a whole adventure in of itself. So, what if you could grow food in your backyard with a greater diversity than any supermarket and less work than an annual veggie garden? How does that sound to you? I think when I first heard about it, I thought it sounded pretty good, frankly. So, the what of food forests? In the many now think piece articles that will sometimes come across your website, your computer feed, that now you've attended this, they know, and will send you articles about food forests. There's a lot of different definitions and ideas about what constitutes this new, but actually very, very old method of growing food. I like to have three requirements to give a definition: edible, perennial, and polyculture. So edible, meaning that you actually grow food in this space. If it's not edible, it's just a plant restoration or a ornamental garden. Perennial, meaning the plants come back year after year after year. Unlike tomatoes, although sometimes if you let tomatoes go, they'll come back year after year after year anyways. And then polyculture, meaning that it's a wide variety of different plants. An edible perennial monoculture is something like, your apple orchards, which are fine, but this is a different model that we're doing. And in food forests, you can grow food many of us have probably had: apples, the hazelnuts in products like Nutella, asparagus, and blueberries. Foods you've maybe heard of in songs. I think there's a lot of American folk tales about pawpaws, about quince and chestnuts and lingonberries. If you've ever been up to York County, Al Johnson's. And some you haven't, like medlar, sea berries, groundnuts, and haskaps. And all of these things and hundreds different more plants can be planted in this method. To grow a food forest, we take many of those previous fruits and nut trees and berries bushes, along with dozens of other plants, and we grow them together in kind of a clump. And you might ask, wait, really? Just kind of thrown together? Um, in this little visual, just like that, just all mashed together. And to answer why we should do that, it's the why of food forests. And I'll quote one of the founding members of the permaculture movement. Though the problems of the world are increasingly complex, the solutions remain embarrassingly simple. Any of us who have grown, an annual garden for veggies or for ornamentals will know how much of a chore it is to keep everything weeded constantly. That's why we have synthetic herbicides that we spray on the ground to kill things, or in fields to kill plants, unwanted plants. The idea I'm proposing here that the food forest movement is suggesting is instead of fighting nature, where we both kind of lose that battle, let's switch sides. Or more accurately, let's learn why nature is so good at growing things so abundantly and copy it. If the first idea is that there's two ways of catching sunlight. You think about an orchard in its long, straight rows, widely spaced, with grass mowed in between, versus the forest edge, dappled sunlight, a mix of every size and shape. So there's some ideas we can take from these different methods of growing. In an orchard, it's designed for maximum space per tree and designed for mechanical harvesters, big machines that come through and just vigorously shake a tree. It's kind of amazing to watch that happen. In that style, a lot of sunlight reaches the ground, hits that grass, and then you have to mow it. On the forest edge, however, is that there's maximum plants per space with a wide variety of plants, a polyculture, and it can successfully capture more sunlight because not as much. Nature will plant trees in the spaces where sunlight grows. Trees and bushes and shrubs will grow. Whereas in the orchard, we have that big space in the middle that takes gas and time and wear on machinery to keep beaten down. But there's more to it than just capturing sunlight. That's one of the most important elements. But if we think of a forest edge, you'll have the big canopy trees that lead into the rest of the forest. And then over on the side is the meadowy area, and then all the trees in between. So one of the ways we copy nature, we emulate it to grow food better, is to grow different layers of crops. And the trade-off is that unlike in an orchard, which has every single tree spaced at maximum for its growth, for whatever that variety is, each one of these trees won't grow nearly as big because it's slightly running into this space, but per square foot, you'll get 5 different varieties of plants in the same place. You might only get one apple. But, and on a home scale or homestead or hopefully larger scale ecological planting, the total amount of things you can pull off of that space is greater than the individual crop, probably commodity, that you can get from the orchard style planting. But there's more to an ecosystem than light and space. See, we use another technique called guilds. Oh, actually, I forgot something. There's names to these different layers. Excuse me. The tallest trees are often called the canopy. The lower tree layer is also referred to as the subcanopy. Then there's shrubs, herbs, ground covers, roots, and vines. Something like the tall tree layer is usually made up by nuts or by big native trees. Wild apples can actually get to be very, very big. Uh, Trees like persimmons, American persimmons, will get to be up to 50 feet tall. And like I said, most nuts are huge. Then the lower tree layer is a lot of the cultivated fruit trees we have: apples, pears, cherries, plums, a lot of things like that. Then between there, the shrub layer is a lot of your berry bushes, raspberries, uh, honeyberries, currants, things like that. Then the herbaceous layer is for things like what's a good one? Asparagus is kind of the classic. Things that'll come up from the ground every year. They once you've planted and you take care of them, they keep coming back. Or like rhubarb, they keep coming back, but they herbaceously die back or are eaten back every single year. Then ground covers cover the ground. Mints are the very famous example, which are very good at covering the ground. If anyone has ever mistakenly planted mint in a place they didn't want it to go, um, because nature likes growing things places. And mint, if it finds the right system and the right conditions, will absolutely take over. Then we have things, vines, like the American groundnut, which also is part of the root layer. Then, if you've ever seen a slightly abandoned fence line and how wild grape will simply just take it over, it's useful. It like I said, it takes up space and sunlight and self maximizes. As long as we think about planting varieties that will take up all of these different layers. So yes, but after the 7 layers that we sometimes use, there's another way to think about and technique, and that's called a guild. See, plants in the wild, in ecosystems, have relationship with each other. Some things will fall and create different sorts of spaces and nutrients when they die that other plants and animals will uptake. Like the vining plants, some vining plants will climb up big trees and then use them for support. Another important element of a guild is pollinators. Some annual flowers attract the kind of pollinators that are helpful for growing certain tree crops. So when we apply these complex relationships of plants and sometimes animals too, we are designing a guild. Couple of the other more important guild functions and relationships are pulling up nutrients from the soil, things that have deep tap roots, actually like dandelions, and field radishes. Those aren't really native to here, but similar plants will go down deep, pull nutrients deep from underground, and then in their leaves store those nutrients, and those nutrients then are released when the leaves die off and decay. Another very important one is fixing nitrogen. Nitrogen is a very important nutrient in plant and animal growth, and only a very few varieties of plant species are capable of what's called fixing nitrogen. That is, taking atmospheric nitrogen, I think it's atmospheric, yeah, and turning it into a form that the plant can use. The very common example is soybeans. Soybeans are in the same bean family. All beans can do this. And they can turn nitrogen from the air into a usable form. And then when they are tilled back into the soil, they provide nitrogen in the soil for your next crop to grow. In most farmland on the United States, there is a consistent cycle of corn and soybeans. Utilizing this factor, we use a wide variety of nitrogen fixing trees and shrubs and ground covers to help provide nutrients on site for our food systems. All right. And there are guilds are a deep rabbit hole that you can look far, you can learn a lot about. I'm just covering the surface here. Um, so now that we know a bit of why they work, what the science is behind them, and some of the techniques, we can get into how to make a food forest happen. This is a little timeline, just a rough overview. First is you have to design it. It takes a little bit of intention, thinking about where things are going to go, where things are best sized, what, if you're trying to design guilds, what systems and supports you want to include to make things happen and spacing them all out so that everything gets just enough sun for them to grow, but they're not too squished, but they're not too far apart. And of course, the designing step also includes everything you want to have growing in your garden or food forest. It's unfortunate if you've taken up all of your space already and go, oh, I wish I had an Asian pear. So it's good to get kind of like the old adage of measure twice, cut once, design twice, then plant once. Step two is purchase in between there, purchase and then install all the plants and other landscaping. Step three is you have to maintain and grow all of those plants. And then finally, you get to eat. You have to cook it up, you have to harvest and put it in your mouth. It's not going to do it. Well, I guess you could just sit under an apple tree and wait, but it seems like a good way to get an apple to fall on your head. Although I think that was part of scientific history, if I'm not mistaken, an apple falling on someone's head. So I don't know, maybe maybe you'll be the next. Oh, who was that? Who was that? Newton. It's Isaac Newton. So earlier I mentioned that I am a permaculture designer, and I quoted Bill Mollison, one of the original instigators. I like that word. Instigators of permaculture. Permaculture is a design philosophy, and a couple other things too. There's a lot of thoughts in there. But to simplify it, it's imported, coined as permanent agriculture, permaculture, formulated in Australia during the 1970s. It is interdisciplinary. So it's a combination of site surveying, landscape design, environmental engineering, and sustainable agriculture. It takes from a lot of different schools to make a cohesive, how do we grow something in a new way? It's a design methodology focused on the flows of materials and energy, how to capture, harness, integrate them. And some of those methods include the food forests that I'm talking about tonight, along with other types of energy capture. There are big like passive solar, wind, and thermal capture, along with a lot of out in Australia, they're very concerned about how much water they have. Not so much. Oh well, this year it's going to be interesting. Not as much of a problem in Wisconsin, but it's still very important to know. And there's a lot of information about how to do resilient and self-sufficient homesteading and similar topics. A lot of people who have their little hut in the woods and fully survive on their own will apply permaculture concepts. One of their main goals is the idea of less is longer. That if you the less you use, the longer your system can run, if that makes any sense. They prefer as few inputs as possible. So trying not to get, chemical fertilizer or pesticides from off the garden, or having to pump water from away from your area, capturing rain, capturing energy, capturing nutrients, which most systems can learn from. So then for the site analysis and design, you can hire a certified permaculture designer, of which there are more and more of, or some landscapers also have some background in this. Um, or you can do it yourself. Unfortunately, for many of my permaculture friends, a lot of the people who are interested in this kind of work are very much of the do it themselves and aren't terribly interested in hiring someone. So it's a bit of a catch 22. Um, this little image right here is of a plot in Alberta, Canada that I was given while I was working as a designer online a couple years ago. Um, and then this is the design I did for them. Really tiny, about an eighth of an acre total there. But even on an eighth of an acre, we I designed anyways. I did not go to Alberta, Canada, unfortunately. Um, uh, well over, I think, 20 different varieties of food crops. So you can make it work. Don't think you need acres of land. Um, but the process of site analysis includes understanding your soil type, kind of how much light you get, where water runs in pools across your property, any microclimates present. So the south side of your building will be warmer through the year compared to the north side. Some things you want to plant on your south side, like annual veggies or things you want to keep very warm, but some things you actually do want to plant on the north side. Um, some things like cherries will flower early, and often they can't be grown around here because they flower out before our last frost date, and then we'll get a frost. Our average last frost is May 11th. I think it's going to be earlier this year, but we'll see. You can never really predict it. And if we get a hard frost before after they fully flowered out, kills the flowers, and you have no cherries. So one of the techniques is actually to plant uh, earlier blooming trees like that on the north side so that they don't wake up and flower out as soon. And then hopefully, uh, doesn't always work, they might be spared the last frost, and then you get cherries more often. Um, Orchards will often do this by placing those plants on the north sides of hills, which just stay cool just a little bit longer. Um, so once you have a bit of information about your site, you can make a plant list according to what makes sense for those things. If you have clay soil, if you're at the bottom of a bowl and it gets very cold, if you have heavy winds, um, and then what you and perhaps your partner or other people who have access to the land want, um, and then also applying some of those guilds and the different layers of a food forest, trying to get things to work together. And then sketching it all out. This is a little fancy. I like hand drawing things, but you certainly don't need to make anything this nice to. You just need to make a little document to remind yourself where you want to plant things. And as long as it's spaced out right, it's perfectly good. So then, for installation and maintenance, and this is a rough overview, I'll cover it a little bit more later. Um, Installation is best done in spring or late fall. Start by digging the hole the right size and depth, planting where your plant is, and then pushing the soil back in, mulching, and applying varmint fencing. Put that in your budget. You need varmint fencing. I said maybe before. Earlier today, as I was going through this, that was optional. It's no longer optional. If you're investing in fruit trees, put $2 for the little plastic containers. You'll save yourself so much anger. So much anger at those little rabbits. hmm. The terrors of growing up is stopping when you read something like little children's nurseries about little Peter Rabbit, and as a child you think about the rabbit's point of view, and as an adult you think about the farmer's point of view. Anyways, once you've planted and mulched and fenced, then they need to be watered nearly every day. Every other day is probably good. for several months. Keep track of the rain you get. You don't need to water on days during or after rain, obviously. But you want to make sure that you're watering, and the amount of watering you have to do is correlated with your soil quality. If you have fluffy, loose, sandy soils, you need to water basically every day for the first couple of years because the water will run out. Whereas heavy clay soils hold on to water very well, and if you were to water too much, you can drown your plant. So having a site, knowing your site is very, very important. Um, Established food forests need less watering, partially because when everything is mulched and all of the trees and different layers of the food forest are present, they can reduce the wind desiccation of the soil, meaning that it'll hold on to water faster, of longer. But when they're tiny and little, you definitely need to take care of them. Um, and then some of the longer term maintenance includes pruning in the winter. Best done now is a little too late. You can still do it, but ideally done, January, February. As a horticulture teacher once told me, if you were having your limbs cut off, would you rather be asleep or awake for that? So pruning is best done in the winter. You can in the summer, but I like that little example. Um, and then usually once, maybe twice a year, fertilizing with compost and other amendments. Um, Ideally, if you were applying some of those guild tendencies, you have to do it lesser. But if your focus really is on a high quality fruit, then no one would blame you for dumping, putting some synthetic or organic fertilizer on it. And it's if you're growing these things, it makes more sense to actually prepare them. And actually, as I learned in a different thing, some trees like some cultivated varieties of fruits now have to be they grow so big. Honeycrisp apples. Have you ever had a honeycrisp apple that's kind of dimpled and a little bit soft even when it's fresh? And I'm not describing it quite accurately, but if you ever had one, you recognize it. Um, they get so big and fat and juicy so quick that they can't uptake calcium fast enough. And you actually need to, commercial growers will spray them with a soluble calcium to help circumvent this because we bred them like many animals. We bred them to get so big so quick that they can't get there fast enough. So if you want Honeycrisp, and I can't blame someone, they're pretty good, you may have to apply those techniques. Um, and hope certain forms of guilds will encourage you to plant host plants for parasitic insects that will help manage pest populations, but those practices can only do so much. And if you're trying to sell anything you're growing, you may need to spray with organic or synthetic pesticides. If sometimes that's the only way to save the tree, and it's better to save the tree than to be dog, in my opinion, anyways. And other people can certainly have other opinions, but if you're planting this, you're taking the time to take care of it. I think it's better to do what you can to save it instead of being dogmatic about not using synthetic fertilizers or pesticides. And maybe the answer, but I can't blame someone who lets something perish because keeping it up because they don't want to spray. It can be a difficult decision, certainly. So that was installation and maintenance. Then finally, harvest. After a couple years, the first couple years, depending on the kind of plant, you might get one or two little things. First, it starts as a trickle, then it comes as a flood. And with that great abundance comes probably buying canning equipment. If you intend to plant fruit trees like this, might as well just go and get canning equipment ahead of time. It'll save you buying it the week of in a scramble. and inviting everyone you know, family, friends, neighbors to come and help pick your trees because a single semi-dwarf apple tree can produce what most more than what most small families can eat in a year. Not, I take that as a challenge, please, but they can be quite productive. And it's always unfortunate to watch things rot on the ground. So inviting everyone you know, and then getting creative with dishes. Oh, I hit a button. um, Getting creative with dishes. I am not a chef or cook by any measure. I'm very happy when I don't overcook my eggs. But with that abundance, you'll need to start thinking of new ways to put apples and raspberries and currants in things. I have a friend who likes brewing mead and other things, so that uses up a lot of berries. So I'm always happy when he's like, "Hey Dylan, can I have all of your currants?" And I said, "Yes, you can. uh, Throw me your currant wine in 4 months." And then doing some research and learning how other cultures used it. If they were the native peoples from this area, or for some of the imported plants that apples are originally from Kazakhstan, actually, or a lot of other plants. I believe most stone fruits come from Asia, if I'm east from China, if I'm not mistaken. A lot of plants come from China originally. And looking up, hey, what does this culture use this for? And you would never think of that yourself, but it might be pretty good. Also, one thing that I'll define here, culinary versus dessert. Um, some of the things we've talked about have been culinary plants. Some of them have been dessert plants. Dessert or table for grapes. I don't know why grapes are described differently. Dessert fruits are things you can eat raw, straight off the tree, just straight. Culinary things are foods you need to process more often. Um, so I don't know if anyone has ever tried elderberries off of a bush. They're not much. They're not great, but they're good in wine and very very nutritious. And so cooking them is that's why they're culinary. All right. So then here is the design I did for Seymour Park. Um, it is the food forest that we planted. And I think the Borges, the father of which who just left, Alina, you helped, right? You did some digging, right? Yeah. We planted this out uh, last fall, and actually just on Tuesday, I was putting some more plants in, and this design is already out of date, so I have to go and fix it again, which is fun. But we have a acre, I think that's at least an acre-sized food forest already growing right downtown Green Bay. This road up here that's Ashland Street. If you can imagine a block this way, that's Mason. So some of you've probably actually driven past it if you drive through downtown Green Bay often, and it's just right there. A lot of things are flowering out. It'll be a couple of years before most of it starts fruiting. But if you're curious about seeing a live, real example, we have one right in downtown Green Bay. And I can cover, and later on during questions, I can answer some questions about this. Real to finish up this part of the lecture, and I've got a second half of it afterwards. Some useful source information. Bill Mollison and David Holmgren are kind of the co-founders of permaculture, although they took a lot from local indigenous cultures and a bit, if I've guessed correctly, I think a bit of feng shui influenced them in some of their site design. There's a big overlap there. Maybe they independently just came up with good ideas simultaneously. Then one of their major students, Jeff Lawton, hosts a qualified online free permaculture design course. Just an absolute wealth of great information. Jeff Lawson, I don't know what the website is called, but that'll get you there, and it's free and very good information. Um, my the school that I teach at, teaching assist. I am not legally a teacher. My boss Val Danton and I are instructors for the NWTC Sustainable Agriculture and Food System program, and we have a permaculture class. It's in week 6 of 8 right now, so you can't sign up, but it will be open for new students next spring if anyone's interested. And she is now a certified teacher herself, so you can actually become a certified permaculture designer if you take the class, which is cool. Last time I did this presentation, that wasn't true yet. And then for more local information, Mark Shepard and the Savannah Institute are some Wisconsin-based, well, Savannah Institute's Wisconsin and Northern Illinois, but they know a lot of in-depth stuff for a little more of our climate and zone and soil types. And they focus a little more on farmers and orchardists interested in trying out new crops like aronia, if you've seen that anywhere, or elderberries or hazelnuts. But they have very good scientifically backed information. And then I'm also part of the Brown County Food Forest Coalition, who helps manage Seymour Park and hopefully some other installations across town. So if you're interested, we have a Facebook page and occasionally host events. So feel free to reach out about that. I think I'm going to take a little question break on food forests right now and ask any questions about that. You can give to me right now. I need a little talking break. And then after that, I have the second half of the slideshow, which is about particular varieties of plants, of fruit trees and bushes that I can go in a little more detail on. So, any questions in the room here? Yes. Yeah, well, it didn't actually. There we go. Yeah, we lost our source on that didn't come through, but yeah. Mhm. So we haven't planted them here yet. We have, if anyone in the audience keeps track of this, we have just been bumped up. Well, the USDA has, what's the NRCS? Whichever government agency does zone maps, has changed climatic zone. We are still in zone 5A. Well, zone 5B's 5A has been pushing, east, westward, and northward. And as I've actually eaten peach trees in De Pere, just had peaches from De Pere that were 5-10 years old.
Can you repeat questions for those on the line?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. Oh, sure. So yes, you were asking about peaches, how successful they are. So my great uncle, who was, I believe, part of the DNR, would, throughout his whole career, people would plant peaches all through northeastern Wisconsin, and then they'd survive for a couple of years and maybe get a couple fruits off them, and then they would get frozen out. But I have seen several examples around Brown County that peaches do all right. And I was, prior to this, I was a milkman as well. And I saw several peaches trees at people's properties, and one of them actually was so abundant that the poor tree broke. It was just so heavy that it went and like split into 4. It was a pretty good peach. So yes, there's as I mentioned earlier, finding a microclimate Finding a warm southern wall where things aren't as exposed to the winter winds is the best suggestion for that. And there are cultivars, yeah, making sure to buy the most. Like if it says zone 6 and some will say zone 5, just buying the coldest, hardiest variety you can. So yeah, no, it's peaches are here. Peaches are here, which I am so happy about. I don't know if they'll ever be quite as good as, peaches from the South, but they're here. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so here you have lingonberries, blueberries growing at food store there.
Yes.
Except that you have tremendous soil to make more city.
Mm-hmm.
Once you do that, I'm trying to grow blueberries alongside of the house. I'm process that work in soil.
Okay.
I need lingonberries, sometimes grow lingonberries.
Yes.
And, so my question is like, once you put pump in the soil or do whatever
Mm-hmm.
you do to make the city, does it stay that way, or does the surrounding soil kind of encroach and you gotta keep doing this every year?
Ooh, okay. So the gentleman in the front has asked a question about blueberries and sulfur. At blueberries, lingonberries, and sulfur. And I'll give a little bit of background information. Things in the heath family, like blueberries and lingonberries, require acidic soil. Yeah, it's acidic. Confusing acid bases in my head right now. To grow properly. If you normally soil is fairly pH neutral. And if you try to grow blueberries in that soil, the leaves will turn red and then they will die and they won't grow very well. And then eventually they will die. I've done that. There are many garden hacks, old wives' tales about how what you can do to acidify the soil. Most of them are incorrect. The one you mentioned, however, is the correct method. Is elemental sulfur, which you can purchase from most gardening stores will have it. It's I believe it's on organic listed. I'm not sure. Depends on the source. But it will applying it to your soil will acidify the soil to the correct amount. On the bag, usually, if it's designed for that, on the bag will have a certain amount. We'll have the ratio of sulfur to soil area to do, and you do need to apply it to every year. It's not as much, but in spring, usually after the last frost, you need to put more on. From what I've read from sources that I trust, the bacteria that break the sulfur down into a usable that helps lower the pH of the soil are only active once the soil ground temperature is at least 60 or 70. So don't bother yet. It's still too cold, but in the summer, put a small amount. Just yearly, just to make sure. Yes, from what I've seen and unsuccessful blueberry plantations that I hope to save, the leaves of the blueberry plant will turn a bright, brilliant red. And that's the signifier that it's becoming, the acidity has not, it is too neutral or alkaline. So I would suggest that. One of the things I plan to do is to actually mix in some of that with some compost. Turning as I turn a bit of a compost pile, mixing with that so it kind of is distributed into this, and then putting that fertilizer with it, so it's kind of the whole package. So starting that now.
Have a separate compost pile just going acidic.
Yep.
And then
Yep.
that compost.
For the blueberries and lingonberries and yes. Yep. I've never heard of someone growing cranberries on a home scale. I'd love to see that. They are also in that family, in the Ericaceae family. High bush cranberries that we are selling are not in that. They're a whole different family. They just kind of taste like cranberries. But yes, so that's what I plan to do. So that I don't have to But just top applying should be fine in subsequent years because the rain and watering will.
Once you get the bottom soil correct pH.
Yep.
Just top dress every year a little bit.
Yes, yes. So in planting them, uh, prepare the whole soil with some acidifying agent. Sulfur is the cheapest one and most effective one. For Seymour Park, we used whey protein because we have contacts with a local brew bakery, I think it is. And that it was actually functional, but it's a lot of organic matter going on it too. And not everyone will have access to whey constantly. So sulfur is the easiest one. Coffee grounds and pine needles will not work. Will not work. Actually, raw coffee grounds will work for a little bit, but when you used coffee grounds are actually pH neutral because when you make the coffee, all of the acidity goes in the coffee. So you'll see that online. Don't do it. I mean, it's good organic matter, but it won't work. All right, great question. Anyone else in person? Otherwise, I will hand it to the wizard behind the behind the curtain here. Can see any online questions. Nope. From, and pardon my pronunciation, from John. There we go. Can you find, oh, it disappeared. Can you send that up again? Oh, well, here we go. Technology. So from Joan, can you recommend a source for finding more obscure plant varieties? For example, I recall a relative's red currant bush being 15 feet tall, but online I've only found 4 to 6 foot varieties. Wow. I have never heard of a 15-foot tall currant bush. Usually usually they get the branches, kind of the stalks die out after a couple of years. I've never seen anything that big. Oh, let's see some of my sources. For some of the weirdest stuff that I've ever seen, comes from a seed company, so they don't really sell starts, called the Experimental Farm Network. And I have grown some of those seeds this year to mix success because germinating perennial seeds is a lot more difficult than annuals. Tomatoes work a lot better than sea berries. Let's see some places I've purchased from. I know mostly tried and true places. Norse Farms out in Massachusetts has very good, like, just very reliable stock. Mostly grown for farmers, so that you can purchase in bulk. There's Stark Bros out of Missouri that has a decent selection. Oh heavens, I have a whole spreadsheet for this. Rain Tree Nursery and Burnt Ridge Nursery out of Oregon, or another one up there that has they've got a pretty good selection, but that's also north enough. There's for weird things. Yeah. I've never seen a 15-foot tall currant, and I've never even heard of that. That's amazing. I guess if you ask them on that one, if you find that, I'd love to see that. But those are places we've Young's. We actually, the order that came in for Seymour Park came through Young's just last week. Those are some where do we get the medlars from? Doing some digging online is something we'll have to do. Is sometimes you have to take a gamble because some places that have very weird varieties might just be one guy in his backyard and struggling to make it work, and who knows where I actually send it to you. um but yeah. Oh, it's up top. I can actually, there we go. All right, thank you. Any questions from the crowd then about okay. Otherwise, then I will swing into the second half of the presentation. What's this? All right. Oh, come on. There we go. So then, a little more in depth on planting trees. This is a surprising fact, but I'll stand by it. When digging the hole, don't fertilize the day of. That can increase the shock of transplant and might hurt the tree. Generally, you'll want to fertilize later in the year. Allow it to relax and establish itself first. Like annual plants in a little cell. If you're planting from a big root ball or a pot, kind of like saying tickle it. But you have to, if it's root bound, you have to disturb the roots a bit, get them to spread out a bit. The plants that are being sold through the Bountiful Branches program are all bare root, as far as I understand. So that won't be a problem. Then one of the most important things, making sure what's called the crown, the line between the roots and the trunk, sits above the final soil line. Some people might suggest putting in a berm kind of around the tree. Mixed, yeah, 50-50. I wouldn't say you have to. And then it's important to apply mulch, either wood chips, leaves, something like that, around the area you've just dug up. But don't have it directly touching your tree. That can allow moisture to set in, which will cause rot and insects to hurt the crown of your tree. The crown and the trunk of your tree. Stakes are somewhat necessary. If you live in a very windy spot, then maybe staking for the first year, but for the most trees do pretty well, especially if they're big enough. And just for the first year. After that, you can take them off. You're more danger of girdling, where whatever method it's tied on with will choke the tree out like a swing set that's been left on for a couple decades. Some things I would, let's see, sure. Yeah. Some things I would do a little bit differently. I would make this wider, actually. When you dig out all of this soil and disturb it all, it helps fluff it up and will allow further root distribution. But I think they're correct in not digging deeper. So at least 3 times as wide of the pot you're planting, in a big wide saucer, but not very times as wide, but just as deep, if not even a little bit shallower than where the roots are. Because if you dig it deeper than the depth of your pot, and then you plant it at level with the ground, what'll happen is that this area will compact. You'll dig soil, you'll shovel soil back in, and then you'll plant it on top at level. And then after 2 years, it will compact and sink an inch. And then you've got a bowl where water will collect at the base around the trunk of your tree, and that can kill the tree. So wide, good, but shallow. If it's an inch or two above the ground level, that's not bad. as long as the roots are covered and you've mulched around it, perfectly fine. And then uh, something a little different method. This is obviously from a pot, but if you've purchased some of the bare root trees, make a more distinct little like imagine, I guess, a bundt pan, like a bundt cake pan. Imagine that upside down where you've got the big deep scoop and then a spike in the middle. Plant your bare root on the top of that and then splay the roots over that piece. That way it won't sink, but it's kind of got the roots will be fanned out over that little cone, if you will. That's important for bare roots. And the same on bare roots can kind of be hard to figure out where the thing is. It's better to leave some of the top roots a little exposed than it is to bury the crown. So, you know, the tree's roots will figure it out. It has no way of growing itself taller from. Is no way of leaving it. Trees have no way of moving themselves up once you've planted them. So if you don't know, aim. That's the side of caution. Aim on. So then, after planting, water often for the first year. Oh, one more thing. Generally, backfill the soil you used for that you dug out of the hole back into it. I've been told that, and like one, fertilizing can shock the tree. Two, adding too much compost in a moment like this will actually create a hydrostatic difference, causing water to possibly pool in this root ball, in this the little saucer you dug, even well after the surrounding soil has dried out, which may cause the tree to drown. So using the soil that was dug out of the hole to put back in the hole, I've heard is best practice to make sure that watering works the best. There are, if you spend 5 minutes looking through books or online articles, you will find many, many different opinions on how to best plant a tree. And sometimes just doing it is the best thing to do. And if it's a vigorous tree, it'll survive. And if it was sickly, there was no way you could have planted it correctly. It'll just die anyways. So sometimes what's, as my teacher once told me, sometimes talking about our cattle farm, if you have livestock, you have dead stock. And sometimes you will go out to the garden, go to the fields and see that one of your cattle has died for some reason. And that's just part of it. Living things die sometimes, and you can't always know. Sometimes it's not something you did. Sometimes life just can't figure it out. So after planting, water off from the first year, as I said earlier. In our dry season, which has kind of been, end of June to like middle of June to like end of July, roughly, kind of changes every year. Be sure to be watering almost every day. Mulching deeply helps more than you think it does. I've seen some like side studies, and it's frankly amazing how much just a inch or two thick layer of wood chips or leaves or hay, if you have hay, can do. I like to have a little cup out by there to see how much water, like if there is rain, how much rain you get, so you can water around it. And as I said earlier, fencing is just so necessary. It just hurts to see damage. Deer, there's two different scales of varmint pressure. Deer and smaller things like woodchucks and rabbits. Deer will bite back the tops of plants destroying the growing tips, pulling back branches, eating flowers, kind of chewing the top. Rabbits and varmints will chew the lowest layer of the bark. In the winter, they will do something called girdling, where the outer layer, which is the growing layer of bark, will, I guess, is tasty to a rabbit. And in the winter, when food supplies are low, they will scrape the outside of a tree for its edible cambium. And this is called girdling. And if they do it enough, they will actually cut off the rest of the tree from its water, and then it'll die. A woman, I was hosting a grafting class earlier this year, and a woman came to me saying, "Hey, why is my tree? We planted this 10 years ago, and it's like had one successful branch that had a couple apples on it, and it's barely gotten to be 6 feet tall." And I went through some other site considerations, and it's full sun. She wasn't like in a divot where it was getting flooded. There wasn't fire blight on it. And she said, "Oh," and after going through all these things, she mentioned, "Oh, and sometimes, there's been like chewing marks at the base," and that's girdling. If a tree has been girdled, you can try something called a bridge graft. That may be successful, but if it doesn't come back, they can. Trees are sturdy things. If it doesn't come back, you'll just need to chop it out and try again. It's $2 at Menards. It was 3 months ago, anyways. Basically just drainage tile cut vertically, and then you pull it open and you place it along the tree. Usually 2 feet tall is good enough to protect from rabbits and chucks. And it's $2. And that $2 will save you some stress and however much you spend on the tree. For otherwise, if you have a bush, which doesn't quite function, chicken wire, which is usually 2 to 3 feet tall, is satisfactory. Burying it or shoveling some dirt onto the kind of making an L shape and shoveling some dirt on the side will generally keep it functional. Although like for strawberries, you need to. Currants are fairly resistant. Bunnies don't seem to hurt the currants too much. But that's the kind of necessary planting for that. For deer, the 5 or 8 foot number depends your context. If you have a fence directly around your planting area or within like a 5 to 10 foot space, 5 feet is enough. Because if it's tight, they can easily jump over a 5 foot fence. But if they can't fully, like if there's stuff right there, they don't like to jump that 5 foot fence because they might get tangled, and that scares the deer, I guess. But if you're trying to make an actual fence for a wall fence for your garden, minimum 8 feet. Just they can 8 feet is high enough where they think they can't jump it. A deer running for its life can actually jump up to 12 feet tall, but when they're just browsing, 8 feet is generally considered tall enough to discourage them from thinking it's not worth the effort to see if they can jump, to see what's on the other side of the wall. I have heard success of people with large spaces making edible walls in which you create a thick wall of something the deer will eat, and then on the backside something the deer won't eat. And so then they'll push up against it and they'll eat the thing they like and then just keep walking along the thing they like, and then they leave your garden alone. I have heard truth of this, but I haven't seen it done. I have not seen it done in my network of people, and I don't trust that. I don't. One deer can destroy everything in a night. So if you're dealing with deer, 5 feet close, 8 feet up a ways away. Um, Also, another thing, little technique is snipping off the flowers of the first year growth or of a partial tree during the course of its whole lifetime will help it put the plant up. The plant will put more energy into root growth or into the flowers you leave. So for strawberries, if you want to grow them perennially, nip off all the flowers and then they won't put an ounce, they can't put an ounce into growing fruit. They will grow big, vigorous root systems. And then the next year you will have abundant, vigorous strawberries. Whereas for, I think it's done for peaches. You can do it for any fruit tree. Peaches and pears are often so heavy. They grow so abundantly because we bred them to grow very abundantly that their the structural branches can't support the weight of a fully flushed tree. So actually going through with your fingers or with a little pair of garden snips and thinning the flowers will help them put reduce the weight on the branch, leading to less chance of it just snapping off, and also more prefer hopefully sugar and growth on the ones you leave. I if it wasn't for COVID forcing me to go back home, I would plan to go to Japanese luxury fruit growing operations, which have many of these techniques just down pat because in Japanese culture it is a common thing to get like a coworker a really nice box of fruit. Like you could buy a $12 pear for someone, and that's like oh, congratulations, you've been here for 5 years. That's a cultural thing. And so they have a whole industry of high quality fruit production, and I was not allowed in the country. Some year, Dillon. Now this is from my boss Val had made these slides, and these are pulled from the Oregon State University Extension. Frankly, I would go. She pulled a little bit wide. University of Michigan and Minnesota have very good, extensive documentation on a variety of different berry bushes and fruit trees. Wisconsin doesn't actually have as good of a fruit tree as a fruit bush like database, which is so funny. But they're our neighbors. Michigan is warmer than us. Minnesota is cooler than us, so we split the difference. Those are great sources of information, frankly, and I trust them quite well. Simply put, digging a hole, as we said earlier, making sure the top of the crown is above the ground. And as I sort of mentioned before, she called it curling. Don't let the roots bundle up, splay them out. They will grow happier that way and better structure for it. She suggests tamping lightly to remove air pockets. Yep, and then watering frequently. Oh, let me see if I can move this a little bit. There we go. Plant the canes at least 2 feet apart. Closer if you don't have that much space and don't want to wait. But if you are willing to wait, the canes year after year will come back and then proliferate in that space. And if you plant them 3 feet apart, after several years, they will take up all of that space. So their spacing is dependent on how soon you want the area to be full and how much you want to spend initially. You could space them 5 feet apart, and then after a decade, it'd be full. Whereas, 2 feet apart, and then in 2 years, it'll be full. And then planting rows 6 to 8 feet apart in the orchard style. They can, in a food forest design, they can be a lot closer. Um, berry canes like this come in, they have a certain biennial existence, let's say. There are floricanes and primicanes. And let me move this over, bouncing it back and forth. And most varieties of raspberries and blackberries will have this information on as their selling data, on a little sheet or something. But most raspberries are floricane bearing. They're the second year canes that have all the flowers and then will fruit. And then at the end of the year, they die and turn into the sort of dry, snappable sticks. Primicanes are the canes that grow up from the ground in the spring, right about now. If you were to see wild or cultivated raspberries, you would see the primicanes budding out of the ground this last week. So the biennial cycle is that this year's primicanes become next year's floricanes. And then there are some ever-bearing or primicane-bearing fruit. It's not a common feature, but some raspberries you can find that do that. Then usually though, the primicane bearing won't produce fruit until the autumn. I guess blackberries generally don't have ever-bearing cultivars, which yeah, I've seen about that, right? Let's see. Yep. So after the third year, prune out the dead floricanes in fall. So it's kind of a tricky, it's somewhat tricky. And after you do it enough, you get quite good at spotting it. But in the fall, you want to get rid of this last year's floricanes. So the ones that have flowered and have fruited and you've gotten fruits from at the end of the season, you can just cut them out. You don't want to cut out the primocanes because they become next year's floricanes. And if you get all of the primocanes, you don't get any more fruit this year. But removing all of the old canes is important. One, for airflow and thus for lowering diseases and pests that might overwinter in them. And also it makes it easier to get to your raspberries because you don't have a bunch of dead spiky canes poking your hands. So just getting used to seeing what those are like. And it's a little more visible on my screen here, but you see how this is says primicane, and it has a green, the stem is green, versus these floricanes, which will have the woodier brown, dark colored stem. That might not be true for every variety, but that's usually a good way, is that first year they're still green growth, second year they'll be dark growth, and then third year they'll just be dead. So there we go. Mulching in the fall is a good idea. Adding a somewhat thick layer of woodier compost. So a lot of wood chips in there. Thick layer of compost in the fall can help them through the winter. Helps create a little barrier of insulation over the roots that just make them be able to spring back easier in the spring. Most raspberries are well adapted to Wisconsin. There are some that aren't though. So when purchasing, we in Brown County are mostly zone 5. So just keep that in mind. If it says zone 6, probably it's not going to do that well. Let's see. Val suggests don't mulch with straw. It encourages voles and mice. I'm sure she probably had very unpleasant experiences on her farm with that if she's including it in this spreadsheet, in this PowerPoint. And as I said, pruning helps airflow and hand infiltration. Trellising is nice, but it's not required. They'll support themselves. But trellising does make it easier to get your hands in there and then pick all the berries. if you're, if you want to pound in steaks and wires and have to work around that. Um, it's okay to dig up and move new primocanes. So that's how you can transplant and just propagate raspberries endlessly. So if you have friends who have a good raspberry cultivar, find the new growths, dig them up, plant them in your ground. You'll have new raspberries. They're self-fertile, so they'll pollinate themselves. But it's good to have multiple varieties anyways, just because it tastes better, and they will come into fruit at different times, which is another benefit. Biggest problem for industrial or farm growers is spotted wing Drosophila. If you ever bought fresh raspberries and then within a day or two they've just dissolved from the store, that's spotted wing Drosophila damage. It's not damaging to humans. It's just really unpleasant because they break the cell wall of the wall of the berry, and then it just turns to mush. And then in another 2 days, it'll mold. So that's not good. There's no sprays that can handle these things, and they're such a pest because they can get multiple life cycles in a single year. Purchasing floating row covers. If you have a lot of raspberries, floating row covers are necessary if you find a spotted wing Drosophila infestation. They're still fine to eat. You just have to get rid of them right away. You have to just eat them right away, which is really unpleasant. And if you're trying to grow them for sale, your crop is ruined. All right, and most of those things apply to blackberries as well. Blackberries, I've heard, prefer a little more. Both of these can be grown in partial shade. They'll grow more berries in sunlight, but I have found that the fewer berries grown in partial shade will be juicier and sweeter. It's a give and take. Perfect for under a different fruit tree. And then they taste good. Currants, easy to grow, very disease resistant. I've never had a disease problem on my currants. They're bunny resistant too. I've never had to fence them. They just survive. They like full sun. They handle some shade. Plant at least 3 to 4 feet apart, 6 to rows. If you're doing rows, 6 to 8 feet apart. When she says that, it's because I know this for a fact. Their lawnmowers are very big on her farm, and so it's always good they want to have a green walkway that is exactly the size of a lawnmower so that they can clear it in one pass, which is, smart, saves you time. But for a food forest, you can grow them denser. There we go. So currants are self-fertile, and I'm going to say this almost every time, it's better to have 2 varieties. Most species that are self-fertile still show better pollination and fertilization if you have different varieties. And again, one plant is usually more than enough for a family of most things. Why not get a couple? This is from previous years. That is a bundle of red currants. There's a couple different varieties. The black currants are usually more pungent. It's it's an intense flavor. I jokingly like to call it a European flavor. They make make good wine, and they're nice mixed in other things, but they're a little more culinary than they are. I've grown to enjoy eating them off the bush, but when when people tour the garden, I kind of use it a little bit of a joke. I'm like, hey, you want some berries? And they take a bite and they go, what is this? It's a little bit musky. Whereas the red and the pink and the white varieties are more table. They're more dessert cultivars. Rather sour. The white ones and the pink ones are a little more sweet, but not as pungent and weirdly earthy, and a lot of deep flavors in black currants. Um, and the most whatever website you have will your purchasing will have a variety of different currents. Um, yeah. Let's see. Yields 10 quarts per bush when mature at 4 years old. Yeah, I can confirm that. They do they are quite prolific, frankly. Um, that 75-year-old red currant bush on her farm was technically illegal. Currants during the Great Depression or afterwards, I think, the U.S. government had mandated the destruction of all currants because they were an alternative host to the pine tree rust. So currants were out to try and save our pine trees, and that didn't doing that didn't reduce the rate of pine blister. So eventually they legalized them. But that's why currants are sort of a forgotten American food, because they are hugely popular in Europe, almost like blueberries are here. And they grow fantastically. They're native, at least some of them are. And they grow well all the way up to our northern climates, but the government made them illegal. um, and then in the 60s undid that. So if that's a 75-year-old currant, that was illegally planted, and they must have hidden those currants. So one bit of history, I think. They also require some pruning. You'll notice in this, I find it easy to do in the spring, because you'll notice the currants that the canes that don't have any new growth on them, they're dead. You can just cut them out. They don't require pruning like apple trees do. And then she had an example of unlike raspberries, which need 2 years to grow, currants will grow fruit and flowers on their first year of growth. So apparently this farm just mows them down every year and then lets the new growth grow. So, and harvest from that. So if a farm's doing it, it must be feasible. Seems like a lot of work, but if it works, it's possible. All right. Elderberries. I'm gonna try and throw this down here. Oh, no good place. Elderberries, fairly easy to grow. A lot of the varieties that have been bred recently were named after like the founding fathers. So like there's an Adams, there's a Jefferson, there's a Washington. I don't know why they picked that, but you'll see founding father varieties of American currants. I know American elderberries, excuse me. Val found propagating elderberries very easy. I never did. She has more of a green thumb than I do. She said just putting them in a bucket with some water and then planting them out pretty soon will do it. And they just don't like me. They just didn't like me. So elderberries bloom in umbels, those kind of gorgeous big old umbrella shapes. Space plants, space plants 10 feet apart from each other. They're self-fertile. No need to make a second one pollinate. And they love spreading even more so than raspberries. Just if you have one of these, you'll have endless elderberries. So yep, mulching. They will spread, and that's okay. And that's okay. Just prepare yourself for that. There is a wild type and a landscape type. I believe the landscape is the European cultivar. And they're pretty, gorgeous, variegated leaves, pink umbels. Their fruits, the ornamental European varieties, their fruits aren't as edible or medicinal, but they're pretty. Whereas the North American cultivar is green, white, and grow bigger. It can grow up to like 25 feet tall after a decade or so. And that's so if you're buying elderberries from a local seller, make sure you're not getting the European ornamental cultivars. Or if you are, you're doing that on purpose. You can trim them. Seems like more worth than effort. Also in spring or in fall, trim out the dead stems. And as they shoot out with lateral rhizomes, dig those up. I just like let them grow a little bit, let their roots get a little bit bigger, then chop them in a little pot, and then move them, and then more elderberries. The only problem they have, like deer and rabbits don't mess with them, but birds love the berries. Birds love the berries. So having some kind of bird netting over them, which I've never done, it's difficult. You can do though, but getting to them as like keeping track of when they're fruiting and flowering when they're ready, and getting those umbels before the birds do, because the birds will. Oh, the birds will. Val makes tinctures out of them by clipping the umbels, freezing them, kind of shaking the berries off into a bag, and then once she's ready, simmering them in a little water for an hour. There is just no good place for this. That's so funny. She claims it's an antiviral. I've definitely had some. It's called Sambucus. That's the name. That's the Latin name for elderberries. I've taken that for colds before, and it helped. I don't know. The joke from Monty Python, The Holy Grail, is the Frenchman saying, "Your father smelled of elderberries." In that time period, elderberries were often used to make wine. So the joke was that he was a drunkard. Next, the nut side of things, and the only smaller nut really we can get, hazelnuts. I really moved the thing right to where it was. That's amazing. In the genus Corylus, also known as filberts and cobnuts. So if you see those named somewhere, like in the botanical gardens, they're named filberts. It's kind of silly names. So they can be 8 feet tall to 20 feet tall, and 10 to 15 wide. You can prune them into a tree or just let them into a little thicket, and they will spread, except for the Turkish variety. They just stay in place for some reason. The American variety of filbert is self-fertile, while the European isn't. Like I said, everything benefits from companion. So getting some genetic diversity, and then as an organic farmer, I always advocate for diversity. Their nuts will ripen between August and October, dropping from the bush when ready. They can be eaten raw or roasted. You could, I'd love for someone to try and make homemade Nutella. I would love for someone to make me their guinea pig and try it out some year. This is still when it's slightly green, so a little bit too early. You can eat it then. It's not ready yet. They are high in oils, which is why they make a good butternut spread. But they need to be refrigerated, otherwise they'll go rancid. So kind of during their harvest season, put out a sheet underneath and shake them, and then do that for every couple of days. Then you'll have a whole box of them. Apples. I don't think we're selling apples this year, but there's an important idea to cover it. One of the most amazing things about fruit trees is our ability to graft them. So unlike annual crops, which are grown from seed, every single red delicious apple that you've ever had is roughly the same organism. I believe Red Delicious was discovered in a field in Indiana in the early 1800s. And since then, that one tree has had the tips of its branches snipped and then attached to other roots of apple trees. And then the top of it grows as that same apple. That process is called grafting. I actually ran a grafting workshop earlier in the middle of March. It's how we keep varieties true. So to do grafting, you take the cutting of an existing apple tree as the scion, and then is grafted to a rootstock, which is this part in the ground. The scion determines what variety of apple the tree produces, and the rootstock determines the height of the apple, as well as disease resistance, its rate of growth, and its cold hardiness. Generally, if you've ever been to an apple picking orchard, you'll see just little tiny trees. Those are dwarf apples. That's because it was a dwarf rootstock. Dwarf trees will mature faster. They won't get as big, and they'll die faster. And they also sometimes have less cold hardiness. So if you're planting apples for this area, finding cold hardy rootstock is important. So usually the semi-dwarf or the standard size trees will have better cold resistance, and they'll get to be 20 to 40 feet tall, but it might take 5-10 years for them to be mature, whereas a full dwarf rootstock will be growing apples in 2-3. It's a give and take. If you ever heard tales of one tree with many different fruits on it, that's true. You can graft multiple different varieties of apples and pears and Asian pears. It's a little rough. And quinces to an apple tree. Or I think pear is actually the better host. It's a skill, but it actually is possible. Things like cherries and apricots, and I think plums can be grafted in each other. They're little families. But almost every single apple tree you buy you'll notice a little knot right above the ground, right above the roots, and that's the graft union. And that's a whole science in itself, but it's kind of amazing that every single apple you've had, like every golden delicious, every was just from one tree that they found. They just said, we're gonna keep making more and more and more. Their seed is what's called not true to type. Ironically, as I like to say, the apple falls very far from the tree. If you plant a golden delicious apple seed, likely its fruit will taste nothing like it. And most likely it's going to be actually kind of sucky. Wild apples are mealy and hard and not very sweet, which is why we graft them. So there you go. I'm just going to blow through this. Plums. We have native plums. There's also imported European and Asian plums. They grow to a height of 12 to 25 feet, should be spaced at least 15 feet apart. They need to be pruned in late winter, like most things. And again, self-fertile with a companion. They bloom in April and May, often some of the earliest blooms you can see out in the wild. They grow, wild plums grow pretty well in ditches and kind of abandoned farmsteads and whatnot. The American, or I think it's technically Canadian plum, is a little more culinary grade. It has sour, tough skin, but rich, sweet flesh. So some people can get through that. Others, you know, bake into a pie, or you can dry them into prunes. So I get one way to use them and store them for winter. We are also selling Nanking cherries. Oh, one more thing. With European plums, and this applies to grapes too, is that it's very hard to grow the European old varieties without the use of pesticides because there have been so many hundreds of years of cultivation of these plants that the bugs that eat them have gotten very strong and very resistant to the first pesticides we used. So they if you plant European plums or grapes, like wine grapes, not the wild variety, you will likely need to use pesticides if you want plants. It's just the bugs are vicious. The bugs are voracious, and can do serious damage. All right. The Nanking cherry, which is one of the plants we will be selling. Little it's a bush. It's a little bush. Absolutely gorgeous. They smell nice. They're hardy up to zone 3. They need a pollinator, but most other cherries are plums. Most stone fruits will just do that. And you probably have an ornamental cherry. If you live in a neighborhood, there's likely an ornamental cherry or something nearby that'll pollinate it. They grow as a bush from 6 to 10 feet tall, roughly, planting at least 5 foot away from each other. They grow, let's see, yeah, if you can see in this one, they grow so weird. They just have like strings of these bright red cherries right up the stalks of the bush, not hanging out of the branches the way that other cherries do. They are native mainland Asia, hence the Manchu cherry or Nanking, both places in northeastern China, if I'm not mistaken. They flower in May and just gorgeous flowers, just cherry blossoms in these compact bushes. And then they put fruit on July through August. Definitely more of a chart cherry. I've had people say they don't like them, and that's their opinion. Definitely good for juicing and turning into like cran cherries, I suppose, for baking into things. Very flavorful though, and not that much pest pressure because they're not native and not commonly cultivated. There we go. One slide I'll talk a little bit about that is not on here. Service berries, also called Saskatoons and June berries, is another Native American variety that we are selling here. They grow in kind of a bushy shrub habitat, about 12 to 20 feet tall, depending on the variety and their conditions. They're in the apple family, but they are more blueberry shaped, Frank. Like their berries are more blueberry shaped. And they're rather sweet, pretty nice. And they make a nice wall of nice bush wall. Thanks for stopping in. Make a nice bush wall. And very sweet. You often hear a lot of folk stories out west of Saskatoons growing and eating. So yeah, that's something we'll have. They're nice. They're dessert quality. They're definitely dessert quality, and they grow pretty prolifically. So if you want a screening wall that's also edible, service berries are wonderful for that. So yeah, come stop by my school's garage and pick up some trees, and we'll also have some veggies and all organically grown and certified. A lot of tomatoes, peppers, lots of fruit. No, not fruit. No, Bountiful. Excuse me, I've been talking for a minute. Bountiful Branches has the fruit trees, but some flowers, things like that, some herbs. In 3 weeks. 3 weeks is that? Yeah, it's the 25th. Ah, all right. So any questions? Yes. Uh-huh. Hmm. Okay.
My question is, goes on all summer, can't they overeat those two? Or, no, they're kind of, they're starting to grow out the top of the tree too, but they have the, footprints on there.
I I have heard of hmm, I have seen mesh varieties. Like it'll be a same size plastic tube. Sorry. For our online listeners, lady here was asking about she has hazelnuts at home, and has little, presumably like the drain tile style.
Well, they're the tree roots that you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. But yeah, she has tree tubes around her hazelnuts, and she is worried about overheating for her trees. And I think that's not as much the worry. Um, More it's that if you have a delicate variety, you need to keep graduating the size of the protection, because if they're too small, they can rub on the trunk of the tree or bush, doing damage that way. I'm trying to, huh. Trying to think if actually I've seen. I haven't seen hazelnut damage. I haven't seen any chewing damage on my hazelnuts, frankly. I would keep it on for another year. Like it doesn't hurt. Does not hurt. It's always be very unfortunate if the answer was they just hadn't found it yet. um, and you find out the hard way that, oh, actually it does. This is good rabbit food. um,
So as far as your,
yeah, if they're in partial shade already, they're fine. Um, if you are worried about it, maybe take a power drill and just pop some holes. Little more airflow in that, but not big enough for critters to chew through. That could be I have seen one of the organizations, the Svan Institute has a production and like nursery wing of it, and they sell a mesh tube that allows light and air to flow through, but I'm sure that comes with a premium cost, and if you already have it. Yeah. So if that seems to be a worry, putting in some molds, it probably could work. Mm-hmm. All right. Oh, yes. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Coffee grounds. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Sat there. Okay. Well, then we have, oh, so yes, so the gentleman was giving direct anecdotal evidence that coffee grounds do encourage that coffee grounds are sufficient to help uh acidify the soil for the blueberries. So many wives' tales do have you know, wives' tales is not the correct idiom. What am I what am I like English is my second language. But yes, giving anecdote that works. And so there's certainly if there's smoke, there's fire. So it can't hurt. I just know for certain that elemental sulfur chemically proven to do that result. Was it used coffee grounds? Okay. Well, there we go. I I'm glad that worked for you, frankly. Yeah, if it ever, and it may be some kind of site consideration where there's some bacteria there that does help, that does break it down, and then in other conditions doesn't break it down properly into acidifying the soil. And life is very complex. But I'm glad that's worked for someone. That's great. Um, and do you just on the spring, whenever you're, is that like a yearly thing? Is that whenever your coffee grounds or? Okay. Plant. Uh-huh. Mhm. That's a very sensible method. Yeah. Huh. Well, here we go. um, you get a lot of conflicting information from people who've even done it. Thank you. All right. Question. Let me chat. Okay. Um, ooh. What variety of serviceberry? Hmm, I actually, Braden, in the back, can you pull open uh the extensions website? I don't know which variety of Saskatoon we got through them.
For Dickinson, you got
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Well, service berries are like a big family of plants. Some of them are, ooh, it's a French word. Amanchelier alnophonia, but I think there's also other kinds. I do not know. I did not do the purchasing for this plant sale. We'll get standing ovation. Okay. Oh, they can't answer the question. All right. Um, yeah. Depends what grow we got, and I'm not sure which. Yeah, I'm not sure on that. All right. Another question? Yes. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah. Uh-huh. I think okay. Did he describe them as being like small blueberry sized or tiny? If he it's been yeah. Mm-hmm. Asking the size of yeah. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, I do believe that I think that's at least one of I think there's a couple different things that are called sugar plums, which makes it tricky because but I do believe service berries or June berries or Saskatoons. Yes. Um, if it was up in the UP, it might have been huckleberries as well, which I don't cover here because people have a very hard time transplanting them. It's kind of like a mountain state region thing where like go out to Montana and they won't shut above their huckleberries and they just can't commercially can't turn them into a row crop and they don't transplant very well at all. So okay. But the huckleberries are all just up in the UP do grow wild too. Could be both. If you have a chance to try both, try them both, please. But yeah, we can't sell. I wouldn't even from everything I've read, I would not bother buying huckleberry seed or transplants unless you're interested in spending money that you'll get nothing from. Maybe it's worth an experiment, and maybe everyone's lying. Maybe like everyone's online a big conspiracy, just have no one grow huckleberries. But Montana secret huckleberry conspiracy. But yes, that could be it. Mhm.
Helpful to have two varieties grown. Can you grow
Yes.
black currants, red currants next to each other? Would that be?
That's fine. Yep. Yep. Ideal, really. Trying to imagine the. Yeah, there's no alternative pest issues that I can think of. Um, there's also one of the American varieties of currants is called the American spice currant, which is a black currant that has gorgeous yellow flowers that it's just has a somewhat peppery and flowery scent in the spring, which I've been told is very lovely. Its currants are very culinary, let's say. But
I have a red currant, of course, the red
Hmm.
lake, I think. and
Okay.
I have some friends up the copper country, UP, that have a farm, and they have currants.
Mhm.
Right in Finland. And so I wanted to spray with one of their black currants, and I stuck with them. They got mixed by red currant. It's growing.
Yep, they currants propagate really well. Mhm. Um, so yeah, so no hard disease problems that I've seen. Yes. Yep. Um, my predecessor did not keep the my predecessor did not keep the documentation on which ones I have, or she did, and Val just hasn't told me where. um, but yes, I have a couple different varieties, and they're quite tasty. Yes. And I recently planted in my spring order, I've also planted some gooseberries, or will be planting. I've ordered them, which are a far cousin of currants. They're bigger, grape-sized, spikier, which is a bit of annoying. But if you're willing to wear gloves or let your hands get little pricked up, for they're quite good. And then there is a currant gooseberry cross called Josta or Josta berry that I'm also going to be trying out one of that has a bigger, fuller, fruitier taste like a gooseberry, but it's not spiky as a currant is. Another plant that I would love to plug that I'd love to encourage that we don't sell, but you can get them heck even at Ivy Trails over in Alleyway, Bellevue. Okay. Is um honeyberry or haskap. They are an edible honeysuckle. Well, actually, mine are little. The one at Seymour Park is big. They look like weird oblong blueberries, but they have absolutely wonderful flavor. Just it's a some of these like the Nanking cherry and I think the pin cherries are being sold and elderberries. They're not. If you know what to do with them, they're very nutritious certainly, but honeyberries are. If you're planting berries in your garden, you should plant a honeyberry, and they're not invasive. And as far as we know, there's no weird disease cycle that they do. Yeah, so if I assume if people are here interested in those things, hmm? Yeah, I haven't. They might have nibbled a little bit, but they haven't. I only fenced mine off with like 2 foot tall, like a circle cage, and the deer didn't seem to tear them down too much. If they did, I didn't notice it. So hopefully that's but depending on your skies, if you have deer, you might want to fence thing, depending on how big of a space you're trying to grow. Mm. Okay. Any other? All right. Let me check. Oh, no more online questions. Please don't hesitate. Anything you're curious about, I'd love to answer it. Oh, good idea. Thank you for stopping by. Yeah. Please. Yeah, stop by Seymour Park. Hmm. Not terribly. Yes. Yep. Never fenced ours in. Just the birds, which is a big enough problem on its own. Thanks for stopping by. Oh. Yeah, they do. Then yeah. Oh. Oh. Uh-huh. Huh. That's yeah. I've had there's an import store in Appleton that has some European sodas, and I've yeah. We'll have to do that. I have to remember this year and steal some umbles. Thank you for reminding me. Question? Are we packing up, you think? 6:56. Oh, we got 4 minutes left. And if you got a question, don't be afraid to shout it out. Yes. Yeah. Are you saying and when you plant in beds you've already the lady was asking about in some garden beds, she'll find a white film or fungus underneath a layer of mulch. So is this in a bed you've already planted? That's mostly just the breakdown. So is this wood chips, a wood chip mulch? Okay, that's as far as I've ever seen, and I've seen it quite often. That's perfectly fine. That's just a fungus. That's a very natural mycelium breaking down some of those wood chips. That's actually healthy. Oftentimes, those fungus help discourage things like grasses and weeds from growing. They say this is our territory, and they won't let other things grow. It's an allelopathic effect, so that's fine. That's part of the reason why we should always leave a little space between the mulch and the trunk of a tree or a bush, because breaking down, mulch will break down, and if you have that directly adjacent to the tree, it could start breaking down the bark of your tree, and that's how diseases and pests get in. So that's good. That means you have healthy, and that helps build healthy soil, which is great, which is what we want. It reduces the need for fertilization. But just making sure that it's not touching the tree. You don't want to bury it. Great question.